Um, so I just want to come on and just chat a little bit about the Australian electoral system, because I think it's quite interesting. We just had elections in Australia on the 3rd of May, just the Saturday before last. And one interesting observation is that this was a general election. So this was an election for both houses. So we have two houses of parliament in Australia. The lower house, which is what we call the House of Representatives, and comprises 150 members from 150 electorates around Australia. So there's 6 states in Australia and 2 territories. So each electoral division, area, which is an electorate, has one elected member of parliament who then comprise the 150. So that's the lower house, which is bigger, and then there's a second house, which is a Senate, and the Senate has 76 members, and it comprises 12 members from each of the 6 states and 2 from the smaller territories. So where I am at the moment is Australian Capital Territory, and we have 2 members in the Senate. And the other territories, Northern Territory, also has 2 members. And so that's the 2 houses. So the elections are also a little bit different. So we have a system of election called preferential voting system. It's different to what the US has, which is one the first past the spot, whatever they call it. So in America, you only vote for one candidate. So in Australia, you vote for preferences of people. So preferences of members of parliament. So the prime minister comes from the majority winning party from the lower house. So the house has got 50 members. So I'll first talk about that lower house. It's simpler. So the House of Representatives, remember, we have 150 electoral areas, electorates, and each electorate has to nominate one candidate, and they're smaller, obviously, because there's more of them. So there's smaller electorates in the country. So how you vote, and maybe I'll share a screenshot of how the voting poll looks like. So you vote according to your preference. So if there's 6 candidates in my area and I'm voting for the member of parliament, I'll vote from my first preference to my last preference, and you have to indicate who you prefer. And again, voting is compulsory in Australia, so you have to vote, otherwise you get a fine. So you vote from number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In my case, if there's 6 people, and if I don't vote, that way my vote is invalid. So it's important in the lower house that you vote for everybody that's on the ballot. So if there's 12 people, you indicate your preferences that way. So from 1 to 12. And then, so what happens? Typically, it's a simpler election for the member of parliament, and I'll explain this. So the way that it works is, when the vote closes at 6 p.m., they do the counting. So they count for the person who's got the most preferences, so the most preferred candidate in that area, so in that electorate, and the person with the most preferences wins, basically. So you need to meet the quota. So that's a whole different topic, but ideally you need to have more votes to win, as more preferences to win. And so what then happens is, if there isn't if the winning candidate doesn't have the quota, and it's not often, it doesn't happen a lot in the lower house. Often enough, the first preference will reach the quota in most cases in the lower house. It's a little bit different with the upper house, which is the Senate, and I'll explain that one later. So in the lower house, the first person on the preference to cross the quota wins, because we only have one member elected, so that's simple. But typically, if you haven't reached the quota in that area, then what would happen is we will go to the second preference. So in the way that happens is, so if I have voted for number 6, the person number 6, so basically a preferred list, my least preferred candidate basically drops off in the first round of counting, and my preference for the second person is taken basically, and those votes, so my votes for the guy that's dropped off, basically number 6 guy, is given to my second preference person. So if I preferenced somebody else, my vote, if the last candidate that I voted first preference has become last and we haven't filled the quota, my preference is shifted to my second preference basically, if they're still in the running. And if we still don't have that preference bringing up a clear winner, basically meeting the quota, then we go to a third count and a fourth count until everybody's preferences are counted and we have enough votes for a winner to be declared. So the interesting observation as well is you would have noticed, and if you look at the Australian Electoral Commission at the moment, we have not finished counting the votes. So the votes are probably at 80% or 86%, something like that. And this is, it's the 11th of May or 12th of May now. This is many days after the 3rd of May. So election was held on the 3rd of May. They're still counting because, again, it's because of the preferences. They're still trying to figure out how the preferences will lie, even after declaring the winner. So the winner is declared soon after the election, because what they do is they take, and maybe we can talk about this one later, but they take about 15% of the vote as a sample size, which will determine how the preferences will lie. So they can easily determine who the winner is going to be, because it's an easier house, by randomly selecting 12% of the total votes and just declaring the winner based on those percentages, because the preferences that's the least statistically significant amount of votes that you should be selecting a winner with. It's very interesting how that happens. So at 6 o'clock, the votes closed. At 6:30, the ABC was able to call the winner, and that's the reason why. The lower house is easy, and so the winning party basically then fronts up the leader to become the prime minister. That's how it works. So we don't directly elect a prime minister, we elect a local member in the electorate. So the prime minister has to be on the ballot as well, and he has to be elected in his electorate, and he has to be a member of parliament first, and then he becomes leader because he is leading the winning party. So that's the first part. The second part is the Senate. So maybe I'll explain a little bit quicker, but it's a little bit more complex in the Senate, because the Senate has terms of 6 years, and it typically works alternatively. So we have half the member of the Senate being elected in this election, and then the other half will be elected in the next election. So it becomes a little bit more complicated. But in the other lower house, elections happen every 3 years. It's a minimum of 3 years. So it could be anywhere in between there. The prime minister can call the election between there. So in the Senate election, so you actually have two options of voting. You can vote either by the party, or you can vote individuals within the party. So and then the Senate election is very different too, because each of the 6 states has a fixed number of votes. So there's 6 senators from each of the states are voted every election. It's 12 in total, but we always have half senates. So we always have half the senators up for election this election time. So in Canberra, though, in the territories, unfortunately, we only get 3 terms, which is a bit unfair, but that's what happens. So the senators get to be elected in 2 different ways. So you can choose to elect the senator by electing the party, or you can elect the senator within that party. So you can preference them, and remember, we have 6 senators, so the preferences are a little bit different for Senate vote. So you can vote up to 6 senators below the line, the members, the senators, and you can vote for up to 6 parties on the top as well. And if there's more parties, then you don't have to vote for more. But typically, you just indicate some preference. And then the reason it takes long is because they then have to do the same counting of the votes and preferencing, and then switch the preferences if there's not enough quota that's been met. So in my local Senate area, which is Australian Capital Territory, we have 2 seats. We know who's going to be getting those 2 seats, but all the preferences have not been counted. So, we're still sort of not declared officially. And that's true with a lot of other states too. So that's a bit of a primer. It's a very interesting system. And so the Senate has never been a majority Senate, well, except 1970, I believe. And the reason is that it's a fixed number of senators. So, and ideally, so what people tend to do is they spread the preferences. So you wouldn't find someone voting the same party. And ideally, there's more candidates standing for election. So you would find that, so there's 2 major parties in Australia. So the Australian Labor Party, which has won the election on the 3rd of May, and they won that day. They won the lower house, and so they formed government. So the Prime Minister is from the Labor Party, from an electorate in the Labor Party in Australia, and we still don't have a full Senate. We still don't have full members of Parliament elected officially yet, because the counts are still going. The lower house counts are a bit much easier. The upper house, the Senate, still continuing. So I think what I was keen to sort of just bring up is the fact that in the Senate, we have never had a majority Senate, because remember, we have fewer votes. So we have only 72 senators. And remember, because of the system that I've described, it becomes harder, because you need every state has got 12 seats, right? So you can imagine, if you're voting by preference, you definitely have more than one party. So you cannot have, it's hard to have a majority, because you have to vote by preference, and you have to vote by preference. So it tends to favor smaller parties, because we see that we don't just vote for one. So the second vote, the third vote counts up to the 6th, remember. And people tend to spread the votes out. So it's a very, very interesting system. It's never been a majority parliament, so a Senate. So what tends to happen is the independents, who are have become very strong. They always hold a balance of power, and I think it's a good system. So the Senate is supposed to check the lower house, and the 2 houses are supposed to be equal in power, but there's some taxation and some laws that reside with the lower house, and it's obviously passes more laws, the lower house, but they're supposed to be equal. But they like to say that the Senate is more prestigious, but yeah, it's a very interesting system, the preferential voting system, and until now we don't have a concluded tally, because of the way that the preferences are switched from the bottom to the second candidate, the third preference, the fourth preference. So I voted, or in the way that I voted, and my candidates, one in the local electorate, in the lower house, we still we have the Labour Party and the Greens winning that race, and then because we only have one, it's going to be the Labour winning. But because the Greens and the Independents are so close, we still don't know who's going to be second. And then it's the same for the Senate. So it's interesting because in Canberra we have to vote every 3 years for the Senate, but in other states they alternate. So they only half the senators are up for election. So they call it half Senate election. So yeah, that's a bit of a primer. It's a little bit complicated for myself as well, and I still don't know how they do the quotas. The quotas are a little bit interesting, but yeah, it's a really, I think it's a good system. But in the Senate, and also in the lower house, and it gets representation happening. And as you can see in the Senate, we don't have a clear majority, and we've only had a clear majority once, and that's because you have 6 possibilities of voting people, and you tend to distribute the votes, and people tend to vote different people from different parties, so you don't vote the same person from the same party. So that's a bit of a primer, interesting primer.